Hello and welcome. This episode is another Q&A and it's been created from the questions shared inside the recovery circle. These are real questions from real people who are right in the middle of recovery. People who are doing their best, feeling confused, scared, hopeful, stuck and brave all at the same time. If you're listening to this through the podcast, I want you to know that these questions are shared anonymously and they reflect things so many people think but don't always feel able to say out loud. In this episode, we're going to talk about digestion, fullness, hunger, fear, trust, and what happens in the body when it's learning to feel safe with food again. If you're listening and finding yourself nodding along, that's not an accident. You're not alone in this. So, take a breath, get comfortable, and let's go gently into the first question. So, the question is, how do I face the fear of feeling full? It's one of the biggest obstacles for me. Feeling full triggers the eating disorder thoughts, creates that I feel fat feeling, and brings a lot of physical discomfort. This is such a big one, and honestly, you are so not alone in this at all. For so many people, hunger isn't actually the scariest part of recovery, fullness is. And that actually does make complete sense when you think about it. If you've lived in restriction for a long time, emptiness starts to feel familiar, predictable, safer, cleaner. So when your body begins to feel full, your nervous system doesn't experience that as neutral. It experiences it as a threat, almost like something has gone wrong. And that's why the eating disorder thoughts suddenly get loud. That's why panic comes in and why there's this urgent need to escape the feeling or undo it or compensate in some way. But I want to say this clearly, the fear you feel around fullness isn't because fullness is bad or wrong. It's because your body and brain have learned to associate fullness with danger. And I also want to talk to you about the phrase you used, the feeling of being fat. We're all told fat isn't a feeling, and it isn't a feeling, although it does feel like a feeling. But actually, it's a judgment. It's a label the eating disorder slaps onto a whole mix of sensations. What's really happening is that you're feeling full, stretched, heavy, uncomfortable, maybe bloated, and anxious all at the same time. And the eating disorder bundles all of that together into this one powerful but shaming thought, because that thought keeps you stuck. So one small but powerful shift is actually to separate those things out. Instead of I feel fat, it might be I feel very full. My stomach feels tight and stretched. My body feels heavy right now. And I feel anxious because this sensation is unfamiliar. This isn't minimizing what you're feeling, it's actually being more honest and far kinder to yourself. Now, let's talk about the physical discomfort because that part's real too. When you've been restricting, digestion often slows down. Your stomach can feel full very quickly. Bloating, pressure, and discomfort are incredibly common in recovery. That doesn't mean you've eaten too much. It means your body's relearning how to digest and trust food again. And this is the really hard part. Fullness doesn't become less scary by avoiding it. It becomes less scary by being experienced again and again without punishment or compensation. Not by forcing yourself to like it or telling yourself it's fine when it doesn't feel fine, but by staying with yourself while it's uncomfortable. And I know I go on about self-compassion a lot, but it matters so much. Instead of criticizing yourself or panicking about what it means, see if you can speak to yourself in a way you would to someone you love. This feels awful right now. I don't like this sensation and I'm still safe. I don't need to undo this. I can breathe and let it pass. Because, sweetheart, fullness does pass and anxiety does pass. But every time you restrict or compensate to escape that full feeling, you teach your nervous system that it really was something to fear. And every time you stay, even if you're shaky, even if you're tearful, even if your mind is screaming at you, you're teaching your body something new. I can feel this and survive. I don't have to fix it. I'm allowed to be nourished. So if you're listening to this and you're in that moment right now, sitting with a painfully full stomach, your mind is spiraling, you're uncomfortable and you want to crawl out of your skin, please hear this. Nothing has gone wrong. Your body's not betraying you. You're doing exactly what recovery asks of you. And that work often looks like staying, breathing, and not abandoning yourself when it's hard. So be gentle with yourself here. Let the feelings rise and fall. That's how fullness slowly becomes just another sensation again. Not a threat or a catastrophe, but just part of being alive and fed. Okay. Next question. My question is about recovery and knowing when it's okay to ease the pressure a little. I know I still need to keep challenging foods and staying away from compulsive exercise, but real life includes things like walking my dogs. The way I do it now feels very different to eating disorder movement. It's slow, led by the dogs, playful, no pace or time goals. If I'm really attuned and know it isn't compensatory, is that okay? And with food, if some days I don't want to eat a fear food because my cravings lie elsewhere, how do you know when that's okay too? Does recovery always have to be so focused, or is there a stage where you can just live? Okay, I love this. This is a really thoughtful question, and it tells me how deeply you're paying attention to yourself and to the difference between recovery-led choices and eating disorder-led choices. What you're really asking is how to stay anchored in recovery without returning recovery itself into another rigid system. And that's one of the most subtle and important shifts that happens as healing deepens. Early recovery often needs clarity and repetition. Recovery has to be quite deliberate for a while because the eating disorder is opportunistic and persuasive. It's very good. It's dressing itself up as logic and intuition or just listening to your body. It has so many disguises. So at that stage, structure isn't about control. It's about creating enough safety for your nervous system to start trusting that food is coming and that rest is allowed. But recovery is not meant to stay in that highly vigilant phase forever. What you're describing sounds like the point where life is beginning to re-enter the picture and you're learning how to include it without handing authority back to the eating disorder. So let's talk about the dog walking first. What stands out is the quality of the movement. It's slow, it's responsive, the dogs set the pace. There's stopping, sniffing, play, training. There's no internal clock, no target, no sense of needing to extract something from the walk. And that matters far more than the fact that your body is moving. Eating disorder-driven movement usually carries urgency, a feeling of having to, a sense that something bad will happen if it doesn't occur, or that food needs to be justified, offset, or neutralized. What you're describing feels functional, relational, and grounded in real life. It's about the dog's needs and not an internal rulebook. And I really appreciate that you also named awareness. You're not doing it all the time. You're watching for patterns. You're checking in honestly with yourself. And that ongoing attunement is what stops movement from quietly slipping back into compulsion. Rather than asking, is this allowed in recovery? A perhaps gentler and more useful question is, what role is this playing right now? Does it feel flexible, Does it feel optional? Does it feel connected to life rather than fear? And can I choose not to do it another day without feeling distressed? Those answers will tell you far more than any rules ever could. Now, food and fear food. In earlier recovery, fear foods often need deliberate repetition. The brain learns through evidence, and that evidence comes from repeating eating foods that once felt dangerous and discovering that nothing catastrophic happens. And that process takes time. And for a while, it really does need to be intentional. But as recovery deepens, something really quite beautiful happens. You stop needing to face fear foods because food doesn't hold fear in the same way anymore. That was my experience. There came a point when I wasn't choosing foods to prove anything. I wasn't mentally checking whether something counted as a challenge. I wasn't avoiding or forcing. Food simply became food. Some days I wanted one thing, some days a different thing, and there was no internal drama attached to it. At that stage, not eating a form of fear food on a particular day is not avoidance, it's just preference. The difference comes from how it feels internally. One is just kind of calmly neutral, and the other carries justification, relief, or kind of like a bit of a tighter feeling. Recovery doesn't mean eating every fear food forever. It means fear no longer is in charge of your choices. And this is key. Recovery doesn't mean your entire life stays permanently recovery focused. It becomes the foundation you're standing on, not the thing you're constantly monitoring. For me, there wasn't a moment when I consciously decided to relax recovery. It happened quietly. I noticed I wasn't auditing my days anymore. I wasn't checking whether I'd done enough. I wasn't negotiating with food or movement. Rest didn't need permission. Eating didn't need an explanation. When eating disorder thoughts appeared, they felt more like background noise rather than commands. And that's often the real marker of this. There's less urgency, less fear, and more space between thought and action. I also want to honour what you said about not being ready to ease it all yet. That's not a problem. That's self-trust. This isn't about rushing yourself into a version of normal that your nervous system doesn't yet feel safe inhabiting. It's about staying connected, staying curious, and staying kind. When you're unsure, you don't need to tighten, control, or abandon everything. Just pause and ask yourself what this choice is moving you towards. Freedom or fear? Connection or control? Presence or performance? The pressure eases as safety grows. You don't force that stage, you grow into it. And from everything you've shared, sweetheart, you already are. Okay, right. Next question. My question is about the guilt, regret, and sadness that come with having had an eating disorder for so long. I look back at the years I feel I've lost, the damage it's done, the experiences I missed or ruined, and the impact it had on my partner and family. I feel deep sadness and shame about how my eating disorder affected relationships, holidays, meals, spontaneity, and caused tension or arguments. Even though things are changing now, that doesn't undo the past. How do you live with that grief? Stop beating yourself up and cope with the feeling that people might resent you for it. This is such a human question. And I want to say this gently. The fact that you can feel this sadness now tells me something important. It tells me you're no longer inside the eating disorder. You're standing outside of it, looking back with clarity, empathy, and feeling. And that alone is a sign of healing. But as you know, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. There is real grief here. And I think one of the hardest parts of recovery is that as the eating disorder loses its grip, the feelings it protected you from come back online. And grief is very much one of them. Grief for lost time, for different versions of yourself, for those moments that could have been different, and absolutely grief for the impact on people you love. That grief doesn't mean you chose the eating disorder. It means you survived it. One of the most painful traps people fall into here is hindsight. Looking back with the knowledge, safety, and insight you have now, and judging your past self by today's understanding. That's not fair, and it's also not true. You didn't choose an eating disorder knowing what you know now. You didn't wake up one day and decide to harm yourself and the people you love. The eating disorder was a coping mechanism, a way your nervous system learned to survive something that felt overwhelming, unsafe, or unmanageable at the time. And that matters. When you say, "I wish I'd chosen another path," I hear so much self-blame. But the reality is that the version of you back then didn't feel like there was another path. There was fear, there was distress, there was a nervous system doing the best it could with the tools it had. You didn't ruin things because you didn't care. You struggled because you were struggling. And yes, the eating disorder affected relationships. It created tension, it made life smaller, that's true. Two things can exist at once. You can acknowledge the impact and hold compassion for yourself. Beating yourself up now doesn't heal the past. It only adds more suffering to a story that already holds enough pain. What does help is allowing grief to be grief, but not turning it into punishment. Grief says this mattered to me, and shame says I'm bad because of this. Those are very different experiences. You also asked about resentment, and this is such a tender fear. And often the resentment we fear in others is actually something we're holding towards ourselves. Most families don't feel resentment, they feel relief. Relief that you're still here, relief that things are changing, and relief that the future looks different. And if there is hurt in relationship, recovery gives space for that to be spoken, repaired, and held with honesty. Not through self-flagellation, but through presence, through showing up differently now, through allowing connection where before there was fear. Repair doesn't come from endlessly apologizing for the past. It comes from living differently in the present. And this is important. You cannot undo the past, but you can integrate it. Those years weren't meaningless. They shaped you. They gave you insight, depth, empathy, and understanding that many people never develop. And no, that doesn't make the suffering worth it, but it does mean it isn't wasted. Part of healing is learning to speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you love who had been ill for years. You wouldn't tell them they'd ruined everything. You wouldn't tell them they should have known better. You would recognize how hard it was and how much strength it took to survive and then choose recovery. Self-compassion's not this fluffy idea, it's essential. It's the difference between staying stuck in regret, which, let's face it, isn't going to change anything and it's just going to make you feel shit, and moving forward with integrity. And finally, I want to say this. The fact that things are changing now matters. It matters more than you might realize. Every meal you eat with ease, every moment of presence, every choice that isn't ruled by fear. They're not small things, they are how the story continues. You can't erase the past by hating yourself for it, but you can honor it by choosing something different now, and you are doing that. Grief can walk alongside recovery. It just means you're human, and with time, that grief softens. Not because it just disappears, but because it becomes held within a much bigger and fuller life. You're not defined by the years you've lost. You're defined by the fact that you're here, choosing to live differently now. Okay, next question. I read about what other people eat in recovery, and the amounts really scare me. They seem to eat so much and still look fine, while I feel like I just have to look at food and I gain weight. And I'm terrified that if I eat more, I'll just keep stacking weight on forever. Will this ever balance out? I want to enjoy eating without worrying about every mouthful changing my body. Okay. I want to start by naming something really important here. This question isn't actually about food quantities. It's about weight. And more specifically, it's about what the fear of weight gain means, what it feels like, and what you're telling yourself about it. When you're in recovery, weight becomes the lens through which everything is interpreted. Hunger, fullness, eating, rest, enjoyment, everything gets filtered through what is this doing to my body? And that makes sense. The eating disorder trained your brain to treat weight as the ultimate measure of safety, worth, and control. Okay? Safety, worth, and control. So, of course, your mind is constantly scanning for it. A body that has been restricted doesn't gain weight in a calm, linear, predictable way at first. It gains weight in a protective way. And this is a key thing that often gets missed. Early recovery weight changes are often about safety, not fat gain in the way the eating disorder imagines it. There are fluid shifts, inflammation, refilling of glycogen stores, restoration of organs, hormonal calibration, nervous system repair. Your body is essentially saying, I don't trust this yet, so I'm going to hold on tightly. And that can feel frightening, it can feel unfair, and it can feel very different to what you see in others. When you look at people who seem to eat a lot and look stable, you're usually looking at bodies that are no longer in survival mode. Bodies that have had consistent nourishment for long enough that they don't need to cling on anymore. Their weight isn't being defended through fear, it's being regulated through trust. And right now, your body hasn't built that trust yet. So when you say, I stack weight on even with small amounts, what you're really describing is a body that is still bracing, still expecting famine, still prioritizing safety over balance. That doesn't last forever. But what does prolong it is staying hyper-focused on weight, watching it, interpreting every change as danger, adjusting food in response to fear. That keeps your body stuck in that defensive mode. And I know that's a horrible paradox because the thing you want most, stability, ease, and trust, only comes when you stop chasing it. Another really important thing here is that weight gain in recovery is not a moral failure, and it's not something you're doing wrong. It's information. It's your body saying, I need more safety before I can relax. The goal of recovery is not to eat in a way that keeps your weight down. It's to eat in a way that allows your body to stop fighting you. And when that fight ends, weight stops being the main event. I can tell you from lived experience that there came a point where I didn't think about watching, tracking, or bracing myself around food anymore. And I wasn't eating less. It was because my body no longer felt threatened by eating more. My weight settled, my appetite settled, food lost its intensity and drama. And I did not get there by managing my weight better. I got there by letting go of weight as the organizing principle of my life. And that's the part the eating disorder doesn't want you to believe. It tells you that vigilance keeps you safe, but in reality, vigilance is just what's keeping you trapped. So yes, sweetheart, it does balance out, but not by eating carefully or monitoring or comparing yourself to others, but by allowing your body to finish the work it started when you chose recovery. The phase you're in right now is not the final outcome, it's the messy middle. The part where your body's saying, I'm not sure yet, but I'm trying. And the freedom you want, eating without fear, without calculating the impact of every mouthful, that doesn't come from controlling weight. It comes from your body learning that it no longer needs to defend itself against food. That learning takes time and it takes courage, but it does happen. Okay, next one. I'm struggling with fear of weight gain and fear of staying the same. I lived the first part of my life in a thin to very thin body and the rest of my life in a larger one. I don't consciously restrict anymore, but I've never truly let go of the hope of becoming thin again. Every time I stop trying to control my weight, it goes up. Now my body seems to be saying it's had enough. It doesn't want hunger scales, calorie counting, or exercise. Restricting isn't an option, and staying this weight feels unbearable. The idea of gaining weight feels impossible. I feel totally trapped, and I don't know where to begin. I want to meet this one really gently because what you're describing is a very real and very honest place to be. What I hear isn't confusion or contradiction. What I'm hearing is a body and nervous system that have reached a point of truth, a point where something inside you is saying, I can't keep living in this constant negotiation anymore. For many people, especially those who've spent years or decades living with their body under observation, under quiet pressure to change, there comes a moment where the body asks for relief. Relief from being monitored, relief from being measured against a future version of itself, relief from always being the thing that needs fixing. Even when restriction hasn't been obvious, the goal of thinness has been there in the background, and that goal keeps your nervous system slightly braced, always alert, always waiting for the next attempt to change things. So when you're saying your body no longer wants hunger scales, calorie counting, or exercise, I actually hear wisdom. I hear a system that has carried this for a long time and now is asking to rest from being managed. And that's not something to override, it's something to listen to. You're also naming a really painful paradox. Restricting doesn't feel possible anymore, and yet staying at this weight feels unbearable. And the idea of gaining more weight feels impossible to tolerate. And I hear you, that's a really uncomfortable place to be. It makes sense that you feel trapped because none of those options feel safe. Your old strategies no longer work and the new ones haven't earned your trust. And this is where I want to gently shift the focus away from weight itself, because weight is the symbol here, it's not the root. At the heart of this is safety. Your body has spent so many years being watched, corrected, hoped over, and asked to be different. What it's asking for now is neutrality, a pause, a chance to settle without being evaluated or pushed towards an outcome. And I want to acknowledge something important. When you say staying this weight feels unbearable, that matters. There is real grief here. Grief for the body you once had, grief for what thinness represented, grief for the idea that one day things might finally feel easier if your body were different. And that grief deserves compassion, not dismissal. What often keeps bodies stuck in this constant cycle of weight change isn't eating too much, it's living in ongoing negotiation. Still hoping, still bracing, still waiting to get back to a body that once felt safer or more acceptable. And as long as that hope is quietly running in the background, your nervous system doesn't fully settle. And when your nervous system doesn't settle, your body doesn't either. What your body seems to be asking for now isn't acceptance in the sense of liking where you are or approving of it. It's something much simpler and also much deeper. It's asking you to stop fighting reality long enough for it to exhale. To eat without promising yourself you'll fix this later. To rest without telling yourself it's temporary. To let your body lead even while your mind is scared of where that might go. And I know that can feel terrifying because the eating disorder equates letting go with disaster. It tells you that if you stop trying, everything will spiral. But what actually tends to happen when a body is finally allowed to stand down from defense, it's not endless weight gain, it's recalibration. Slowly, probably unevenly, and very much in its own time. And that recalibration only becomes possible when the war ends. If you're listening to this and feeling completely unsure where to place your feet next, I want you to hear this part gently. What you're experiencing makes sense. This place you're in isn't a dead end, it's a pause point, a moment where your body's asking you to stand with it, rather than push it forwards or pull it back. You don't need to know exactly where this leads yet. You don't need certainty before you take the next step. What you need right now is permission to stop negotiating with yourself. This stage isn't about giving up. It's about coming home to your body after a very long time of being at war with it. And sweetheart, that is a very brave and meaningful place to be. Okay. Next question. I keep coming back to the all-in approach that some recovery advocates talk about. The version I see most often involves stopping everything and eating very large portions of fear foods very frequently. Whole bars of chocolate, big slices of cake, tubs of ice cream. While I agree that fear foods' rules and behaviors need to be challenged, this extreme version feels like another set of rules to me. In my recovery, I'm eating fear foods regularly, challenging daily, but in a way that feels more varied and sustainable. I worry that extreme all-in isn't realistic long-term and could even set someone up to restrict again later. Am I doing enough? I'm actually really glad you asked this because I've said it lots of times, all-in. This is where people start quietly doubting themselves and wondering if they've somehow missed the right way to recover. It's important to understand that all in was never meant to be a performance or a checklist. It's never meant to turn into a new rule book that says you must eat certain foods in certain quantities at a certain intensity in order to be doing recovery properly. At its heart, all in is a mindset. It's the decision to stop negotiating with the eating disorder. It's the willingness to stay present with fear rather than organize your life around avoiding it. It's choosing recovery again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or destabilizing. For some people, especially early on or after long periods of restriction, the body genuinely wants these large amounts of food, often very energy-dense foods, and it wants them repeatedly. And that's not about forcing anything, it's the body restoring safety and trust in its own way. In those situations, eating large quantities frequently can be exactly what supports healing. But that experience isn't universal and it isn't a requirement. Recovery is not about swinging from one extreme to another. It's about dismantling the system of fear and control that sat underneath the eating disorder in the first place. If someone replaces rigid restriction with rigid recovery rules, the structure may look different, but the nervous system is still living under pressure. And for many people, especially those with perfectionism or long histories of control, that pressure can keep the eating disorder alive in a new form. What you're describing in your own recovery sounds very different. You're eating fear foods regularly, you're varying quantities, you're challenging rules around timing, choice, and flexibility, and you're staying curious rather than dogmatic, and you're paying attention to how this fits into a real lived life. That's not avoidance, that's integration. Recovery isn't about eating the most fear foods in the biggest quantities. It's about fear losing its authority. It's about food no longer carrying moral weight. It's about your nervous system learning that eating doesn't require vigilance or punishment. And something else you said actually really matters, this concern about sustainability. Recovery is not a phase you power through, it's a way of living. If an approach leaves someone bracing, overwhelmed, or constantly worried about what comes next, their system hasn't yet learned safety. Slowing down later can then feel dangerous, even if it's actually appropriate. What allows recovery to last is not intensity, but consistency. Staying with yourself through fear, not abandoning yourself when anxiety spikes, not needing to escalate to prove commitment, just continuing to choose nourishment, rest, and flexibility over control. That's the work. The question to come back to isn't, am I eating enough fear foods compared to someone else? It's, is my eating disorder losing influence in my life? Is food becoming less charged? Are choices feeling more flexible? Is there less urgency and more trust? Is life getting bigger rather than smaller? Those are the signs that matter. Doubting whether you're doing enough often comes from the same place the eating disorder lived. Comparison, self-criticism, the belief that recovery has to look a certain way to be valid. There is no single recovery script. There's no universal menu. There's only the ongoing practice of staying connected to yourself, even when fear shows up. All in isn't about doing more. It's about letting go of the need to prove anything and choosing to stay present with yourself instead. And from everything you've shared, that's exactly what you're doing, sweetheart. Right, okay. Lots of questions today. So, next question. Why does everything feel so much harder when we're in a restrictive state? Why do people, noise, and everyday life feel unbearable? And why can we become irritable, angry, or unlike ourselves when we know we're usually kind and patient? It feels awful not to recognize yourself. And how does restriction affect memory? Why are there periods of my life I can't remember? And why do photos from that time feel blank, like there's no emotion yet there? Okay, such an important question because it gets to the heart of something many people feel deep shame about, but quite often don't understand. When you're in a restrictive state, your body and brain are not functioning in their normal resourced way. They're operating in survival mode. And survival mode is not designed for patience, empathy, creativity, or emotional flexibility. It's designed to keep you alive. When your brain's not getting enough energy, it makes a very clear decisions about what matters and what doesn't. Higher level functions, things like emotional regulation, tolerance, perspective, memory, nuance, compassion, they're expensive processes for the brain. They require energy. So when energy is scarce, the brain downshifts, and what's left is a much more reactive system, where everything feels louder, people feel more irritating, noise feels overwhelming, and small things can feel huge and unbearable. It's because your nervous system is already stretched thin, so there's no buffer, no capacity, no space between stimulus and reaction. That's also why people often describe becoming sharper, angrier, more rigid, or more withdrawn when they're deep in restriction. Not because they've suddenly become a different person, but because the parts of the brain that allow softness and regulation simply aren't being fueled. It can be deeply distressing to look back and think, that wasn't who I wanted to be. And it's important that I say this clearly. That wasn't your character. That was starvation. Restriction doesn't just take food away. It takes access to your full self. The illness narrows you. It shrinks your emotional range. It pushes you into a state where the world feels threatening and overwhelming, and your system reacts accordingly. Now, let's talk about memory, because this part's huge. When you're in prolonged restriction, your brain is under chronic stress. Cortisol is high. The nervous system is stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. And in those states, the brain prioritizes immediate survival, not memory encoding. So experiences simply don't get stored properly. That's why there can be entire periods that feel missing. Why photos feel flat or unreal. Why there's a sense of blankness or an emotional void when you look back. It's not that those moments didn't matter. It's that your brain wasn't in a state where it could register them. And that numbness you describe when you see photos, that's not indifference, that's disassociation, a protective response. When something is too much to feel, the system shuts down feeling altogether. Again, it's not a personal failing, it's a nervous system doing its best to cope. One of the quiet, profound gifts of recovery is that as nourishment returns, so does access to yourself. Emotions become richer, memory improves. You start to feel more present, more alive. Sometimes that includes grief for what was lost, but it also includes joy, connection, and a sense of being back in your own body. And I want to say this too. Feeling sadness about not being the version of yourself you wanted to be is actually a sign of healing. It means you can see clearly now. It means you care. It means you're reconnecting with your values. You didn't lose yourself because you weren't trying hard enough. You lost access to yourself because your brain was underfueled and under threat. As your body is fed, your brain comes back online, and with it comes patience, kindness, tolerance, memory, and emotional depth. So if anyone listening recognizes themselves in this, the irritability, the anger, the blankness, please know this version of you is not who you are. It's who you were when your nervous system was starving. And the real you comes back with nourishment, safety, and time. Okay, next question. I've committed to all-in recovery, and honestly, it's going well. I've stopped exercise, I'm eating fear foods regularly, challenging rules and behaviors, and doing recovery in a way that fits my real life. I'm enjoying the permission to eat and rest. I feel more present and life feels bigger. But part of me is worried that because it doesn't feel as hard as I expected, does that mean I'm not doing it properly? This question makes me smile, and I'm really glad that it's been asked because it does actually challenge one of the most unhelpful myths in recovery. The idea that recovery must be constant agony in order to be real. So let me say this. Difficulty is not the measure of effectiveness. Suffering isn't proof of commitment. Realistically, people who have been living in an eating disorder, deep down, underneath everything, all they want to do is eat and rest. It's the most natural thing in the world to do. And there's all these rules and stuff that says you can't. But when you've given yourself permission to do that, there can be a sense of relief, this permission. Actually, it feels right because it is right. All you wanted to do was eat and rest. Everything else was fear. So for some people, recovery does feel chaotic, terrifying, overwhelming, and emotionally explosive. But it sounds like you reached a point where you're truly ready, you've given yourself permission, and it feels right. It's a relief. What I hear in your question is not avoidance or half-hearted recovery. I hear alignment, a nervous system that's quite literally been waiting for this moment. I hear someone that's stopped fighting themselves, stopped exercising by compulsion. You eat fear foods consistently. You say yes when you used to say no. You meet hunger instead of suppressing it. And you're allowing life to be lived rather than organized around rules. That's recovery. And you're doing this in a way that fits your life. And that's one of the most strongest protective factors against relapse. Recovery isn't meant to remove you from life forever. It's actually meant to give you your life back. You also shared something really important about inpatient treatment. You noticed this pattern before. When structure and permission were in place, you didn't fight it. You engaged, you showed up, and that was somehow interpreted as suspicious or too easy. This is where we need to be very careful not to pathologize readiness. When someone has spent years negotiating, resisting, white-knuckling, exhausting themselves, there can come a point where the system says, I'm done with that. And when that happens, recovery can feel surprisingly straightforward, even though it still requires courage. It doesn't mean there's no fear. It doesn't mean that weight gain is painless and every day is easy. It just means you're no longer arguing with yourself, and that is a huge change. The guilt you're feeling about finding parts of this enjoyable is also very common, especially in spaces where recovery is often framed as a relentless struggle. There can be an unspoken belief that if you're not suffering enough, you haven't earned it. But enjoying nourishment, enjoying rest, enjoying presence, they're not red flags. They're signs that your body and nervous system are responding to safety, that you're alive, you're actually living. You also named something really honest, the worry of it's not that bad yet. And that's understandable. The eating disorder likes to whisper that the hardest part is coming or that you're being lulled into a false sense of security. But recovery doesn't follow a single dramatic arc. Sometimes the hardest part is allowing things to go well without sabotaging them. So age, stage of life, previous insight, therapy, readiness, sheer exhaustion with the disorder all play a role. Some people don't fight recovery because they've already fought the eating disorder for long enough. So, to answer your question directly, yes, what you're experiencing can be completely normal. Not for everyone, but absolutely for some people. Recovery doesn't need to hurt to be real. It doesn't need you to completely dismantle your life to be valid, and it doesn't have to look dramatic to be effective. Sometimes the most powerful recovery happens quietly, when someone finally stops abandoning themselves and starts saying, I'm allowed to live. And sweetheart, that's exactly what you're doing. Okay. Next question. My question is about trauma and eating disorders. I experienced severe trauma as a child, and anorexia and disassociation became ways my system survived. I've reached a place where now I feel more peaceful and human than ever before. My therapist believes I'm ready to start EMDR, but I'm terrified of relapsing. Anorexia has acted like anesthesia for decades, and trauma and restriction feel deeply entwined. I'm wondering whether to protect this piece for longer or whether I'm delaying inevitable pain by not beginning trauma work now. Okay, I really want to start by slowing this right down, because the most important thing here is not the therapy modality, not the timeline, and not doing anything right. The most important thing is you, sweetheart. Of course you're scared. Of course the idea of revisiting trauma feels overwhelming. And of course a part of you wants to hold on tightly to the peace you've finally found. There is nothing weak or avoidant about that. That fear is deeply intelligent. There's a part of you, a very young part, who learned that the world could become dangerous without warning. That part didn't have choice, power, or protection at the time. She learned to survive by leaving her body, by numbing sensation, by quietening need. And anorexia and disassociation were not failures of strength, they were acts of survival. That part of you is still here. And when EMDR is mentioned, she doesn't hear healing, she hears danger. She hears that we're going back there. So when fear shows up, that's not something to override or push past. It's something to listen to. Healing doesn't begin with opening wounds. Healing begins with letting the frightened parts know they won't be forced. Safety isn't created by bravery, it's created by consistency, by compassion, by staying present with yourself instead of abandoning yourself when things feel hard. Right now you're doing something incredibly powerful. You're eating with less fear. You're sleeping, you're feeling human, you're experiencing moments of peace. That's your nervous system learning what safety feels like. And that matters more than any trauma processing technique. Trauma healing's not about reliving what happened. It's about building enough internal safety that the past no longer controls the present. And that safety is built slowly, through nourishment, through rest, through connection, through choice. Every time you notice fear and say, of course you're scared, I'm here with you, you're rewiring something fundamental. Every time you don't pressure yourself to be ready, you're teaching your system that it no longer has to brace. Every time you stay with discomfort without punishing yourself for it, you're widening your capacity. This is how nervous systems heal, not through force, but through relationship. It's also important to know that trauma work doesn't have to be all or nothing. Beginning EMDR doesn't mean plunging into the worst memories. Good trauma therapy always prioritizes resourcing, grounding, and containment. And you always get to slow things down, pause, stop, change course. You're allowed to say not yet. You're allowed to say I need to go gently. And you're allowed to protect the peace you've worked so hard to create. Peace is not something you must sacrifice in order to heal. Peace is something you build so that deeper healing becomes possible. And the more you practice staying with yourself through fear, not fixing it, not silencing it, just holding it with kindness, the safer your nervous system will feel. And from that place of safety, your capacity to move forward will naturally grow. There's no rush, there's no deadline, there's no correct pace. Your journey isn't about revisiting pain. It's about learning that you can live now, in this body, in this moment, with support and care. You're allowed to move forward slowly and take breaks, and you're allowed to choose yourself at every step. And the fact that you're even asking these questions tells me that you're no longer surviving alone, and you're staying with yourself. And that's not delaying healing, sweetheart. That is healing. You're doing amazing. Thank you for your question. Okay, next question. I'm finally letting myself eat much more freely, But after many months of this, I'm still mostly eating large amounts of chocolate bars and cereal or nut bars, often in a couple of big intakes later in the day or at night. I can't seem to get past the fear of having proper meals or creating any kind of regular eating routine. People say to eat 3 meals with snacks in between and then have chocolate on top of that, but something inside me just says no. I think the part of it is that chocolate was forbidden for so long and labelled as my kryptonite. While I'm eating it, though, I can feel my body wanting something more solid and filling. I fantasize about bread, fibre, and proper meals, but I still don't let myself eat the way I actually want to. Then the next day, I'm straight back to the chocolate again. How do I get past this? What really stands out to me here is how much honesty and awareness you already have. You're listening to your body, you're noticing patterns, you can feel what satisfies in the moment and what doesn't. That tells me your system's waking up, not shutting down. Chocolate has played an incredibly important role for you. It was forbidden for years, moralized, loaded with fear. And so, of course, when permission finally arrived, your body and brain went all in. That's exactly how trust begins to rebuild. Your nervous system needed to learn that this food is allowed, available, and not going anywhere. But what's really interesting is that alongside that, something else is happening. You're starting to feel your body asking for more support, more grounding, more substance, more nourishment that actually settles you. That longing for bread, fibre, warmth, and a proper meal isn't a failure to move on from chocolate. It's a sign that your body's ready for the next layer of care. For lots of people, meals feel scarier than snack foods or chocolate because meals ask for presence. They ask you to sit, to pause, to stay in your body, to tolerate a different kind of fullness. And for a system that learns safety through disassociation or urgency, that can feel like a big step. So this isn't about taking chocolate away. It's about adding something alongside it. Chocolate doesn't have to carry everything on its own anymore. You can experiment gently. Chocolate with toast. Chocolate after a bowl of cereal with milk. Chocolate after a simple warm meal. Not because chocolate's wrong, but because your body is asking to be held in a deeper way now. Recovery isn't about following a rigid meal plan or forcing yourself into rules that don't fit. It's about staying connected to yourself as things evolve. About responding to what your body's asking for today rather than what it needed months ago. And when fear shows up, that's not a signal to stop. It's an invitation to meet yourself with kindness, to say, I can feel scared and still choose nourishment. I can go slowly and still move forwards. You're already doing something very powerful here. You're learning to listen. And from that place, meals stop being something you have to get past and start becoming another way your body learns it can trust you. Next question. I can have days where my mindset shifts massively. My motivation ramps up, my determination is there, my actions line up, and I genuinely feel like I'm breaking free. But then I go to sleep and I wake up feeling like a different person. It's as if everything resets overnight. This happens again and again, and it's so frustrating. What is it about sleep that seems to hijack my progress? Is there a link between eating disorders and sleep? This is a deeply perceptive question, and you are absolutely not imagining it. What you're describing is actually, it happens all the time in recovery, and it makes complete sense when we look at how the brain, nervous system, and habit learning actually work. So, first, let me reflect something back to you. Those shifts you experience during the day, the clarity, the determination, the moments where your actions match your intentions, they're real, they matter, they're not fake, fragile, or accidental. They're evidence that your system can move towards freedom. What's happening overnight isn't that all that progress disappears. It's that something much older and deeper temporarily takes the wheel. When we sleep, the brain does a huge amount of consolidation work. It files memories, reinforces patterns, and prioritizes what it believes keeps us safe. And here's the key part. Eating disorders are not just thoughts, they're deeply learned safety strategies. So for years, often decades, your brain has associated restriction, control, rules, and familiar behaviors with survival. Even if those behaviors cause suffering, they are known, and the nervous system values the known far more than the healthy. So during the day, especially when you're conscious, reflective, supported, and intentional, your prefrontal cortex, the thinking, choosing, values-driven part of your brain, can come online. That's when insight, motivation, and change happen. But overnight, when that part quietens, the older habit-based survival brain steps forward. Its job isn't to help you recover. Its job is to keep you alive using the rules it's learned over time. So when you wake up and it feels like you've turned into a different person, what's really happening is that the eating disorder part has resurfaced as the default setting. Not because you failed or that the progress was imaginary, but because your brain hasn't yet learnt that recovery is the safer option. This is why repetition matters so much. Recovery isn't built on one big mindset shift. It's built by showing your nervous system again and again through action that eating, resting, and letting go don't lead to danger. Each day you choose nourishment, even when motivation feels gone, you're laying down new neural pathways. And those pathways do eventually start to carry through the night. Another important thing here is energy. Restriction disrupts sleep architecture, hormone regulation, and emotional processing. When the brain's underfueled, it becomes more rigid, more fear-driven, more black and white. So waking up entrenched in ED thinking can also be your body saying, I don't feel safe yet. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, it means your system is still learning. So instead of asking, why did I lose it overnight? A gentler, more helpful question might be, how can I meet myself compassionately in the morning, knowing this is when my brain is most vulnerable? Many people find that mornings need extra care. Eating early, keeping routines simple, not negotiating with the ED voice. Treating the morning self like a tired, frightened part that needs guidance rather than criticism. And the most important thing I need you to hear is recovery doesn't require you to feel motivated every day. It requires you to keep showing up even on the days when those resets happen. Every time you do that, your brain learns that recovery isn't a daytime fantasy, it's a lived reality. Those hard-won gains, they weren't lost overnight. They're being integrated slowly, quietly underneath the surface. And one day you'll wake up and notice that the reset isn't quite as loud or quite as convincing or quite as powerful. And that's when you'll know that something fundamental has changed. Okay, next question. After I eat, I feel only semi-full at first. Then 15 to 30 minutes later, the fullness increases. Over the next few hours, it feels like the food keeps building in my belly, and by around 3 hours, I feel much more full than I did initially. It can take up to 6 hours to feel settled again. Is this normal? I'm eating 3 to 4 times per day, and I can't remember a time when my digestion felt normal. Thank you for asking this. What you're describing actually makes a lot of sense when we look at how a body that's been undernourished or stressed around food learns to digest again. Digestion isn't immediate. It unfolds over time. When you eat, the stomach initially holds the food, then gradually starts stronger muscular contractions. The intestines wake up, fluids move, enzymes are released, and gas can be produced. For a nervous system and gut that have been sensitized by restriction or long periods of irregular eating, all of this internal activity can feel very loud. That's why fullness can increase after you've finished eating rather than settle straight away. It can feel as though the food is growing, when really your body's becoming more aware of the digestive process as it ramps up. Another key piece here is pacing and frequency. When meals are spaced far apart, the digestive system often has to work harder each time food arrives. Larger gaps can mean slower stomach emptying and a more intense fullness response later on. Eating more frequently tends to reduce that load. Regular inputs of food give your gut repeated, gentle practice and help digestion become smoother and more predictable. So for many people in recovery, moving towards eating every 2 to 3 hours can make a noticeable difference. More frequent eating often means less dramatic peaks of fullness, quicker settling after meals, reduced bloating over time, and a calmer nervous system response to food. It's not about forcing more food into an already uncomfortable system. It's about spreading nourishment more evenly, so your body doesn't have to play catch up each time you eat. The fact you don't remember a time when digestion felt normal suggests your system hasn't yet had long, consistent periods of safety and regular nourishment. It simply means your body's still learning what reliability feels like. When eating happens more often, your body begins to trust that food is coming. Trust changes digestion. Muscles coordinate better, sensations soften, fullness becomes something that rises and falls rather than lingers and overwhelms. It can also help to gently reassure yourself after eating. Something like, my body's digesting. Sensation doesn't mean something is wrong. I can let this unfold. Over time, with consistent nourishment and increased frequency, digestion often becomes less dramatic and less uncomfortable. Your body isn't meant to feel like it's working overtime for hours on end. With regular practice, it usually remembers how to do this more quietly. So yes, this experience can absolutely be part of recovery. Eating more often can be one of the most supportive steps towards helping your digestion settle. It's not pushing harder, it's giving your body steadier signals of safety and care. So, as we come to the end of this Q&A, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone inside the circle who trusted me with your questions. And thank you to you for listening and staying with this conversation. If these topics have resonated with you and you'd like a space where you can ask your own questions, reflect and be supported as you move through recovery, you are very welcome to join us in the Eating Disorder Recovery Circle. In the circle, members can submit questions for monthly Q&As like this, join group coaching calls, attend workshops on different aspects of recovery, do courses, use tools like the Feelings Navigator to help work with emotions rather than fighting them. It's a supportive space that can sit alongside therapy or any other help you're already receiving, or be a standalone support. All the details are in the show notes if you'd like to explore it further. And whether you join or not, please remember this: your body is learning, your nervous system is adapting, and you deserve patience, compassion, and care as you heal. I'm sending you all so much love, and I will see you next time.